All right, so because her banner is going to be coming out here to, well, not tomorrow, but Monday, basically. This video should be coming out Friday. We know Abby Summer's going to be getting a rerun banner on NA, and so I felt the need to kind of go over her again because she has been, over the years, a very maligned character by the community, and I'm really not sure why, honestly. I've talked about her like ad nauseum, pretty much kind of just saying that I actually feel like overall her kit is pretty good and there's nothing too crazy about her, but there's also at the same time nothing really bad about her. So I've never really understood all the hatred that she gets in that regard. So let's go ahead and talk about her because this is specifically the Summer Abigail Williams, the 5-star AoE Buster Foreigner, not single target. So again, Abby Summer here starts off with about 11.7k attack. It's not the best. It's not quite 12k, but it's a pretty like middle ground amount for a lot of SSRs, so not bad. Again, same thing as you'll see right here with her 14,000 HP. It's not too little. It's not too much. It's just right smack in the middle. But remember always, I'm going to tell you guys, the proof is in the pudding with these sorts of things, and you're going to need to judge the character based off its entire kit, not just any one particular aspect. So, as we move on here, she's Earth Attribute. She has 150 star absorption, which is pretty typical, as a lot of foreigners are kind of there around that like sort of archer star absorption mark. And then same thing with 15% star generation. It's also not bad for what she is. Now she has a 0.86 NP charge attack rate, which is a pretty high amount. But again, if you can already see the edge of the cards down here poking up on the edge of the screen there, you know that that's just coming with only one arts card. So it makes perfect sense for why that amount is high then. She has only 3% NP charge defense, which is sort of our standard amount, and only a 6% death rate, which is relatively good. She is lawful evil alignment. She is a female gendered. She is a child servant. She's divine, existence outside the domain, hominide, humanoid, just a normal servant, and then summer mode servant, as well as threat to humanity, like almost all of our foreigners are. So, looking at the overall deck here, again, she's got 2Q, 2B. This is actually a really interesting setup here because I think a lot of people would have preferred her to have more arts cards, especially given her other foreigner form, which has a triple arts deck. So I could see where this maybe would be one source of the criticism, but at the end of the day, it's not a huge deal, and I'll explain why as we get in. Still, as you look here, having double buster is always going to be good for offensive output. Having double quick, at least good for star gen. Obviously not that good for pretty much anything else, but again, all of her hit counts here are at least 3, with her extra attack being 5. So everything right here is average hit counts. So nothing bad about it. Now, as we get to her first skill here, she's actually the first unit in the game that gets a sleep status. And this was maybe a little bit of a tease at someone like Oberon coming later. And again, we'll talk about him when his banner comes up, or at least gets closer. But for right now, you guys can see that, again, she basically will afflict sleep status for 2 turns to 1 enemy. Now, the way sleep works is, this is not the like infinite sleep that Oberon has. It's just a normal one. So whenever a unit deals damage to that unit that has slept, it will wake it up. So essentially, she can put them to sleep for 2 turns. Think of it like a 2-turn stun. It can be cleansed, and it can be, again, hit through to wake them up. So that's the only real difference with the stun there, is that normally when you hit a stunned enemy, they don't wake up from that. But with sleep, they will. It says, unlike stun, though, that'll be removed when the target gets attacked, so that's exactly what you need to know. This skill also removes their buffs, so it is a buff stripping ability, just like her original form has it on her NP. It's actually really, really nice in that regard, so she still retains a lot of similarities with her original form. It's also going to reduce their defense for 1 attack for 2 turns when the asleep status is active. So she's going to put sleep on the enemy, and thus the next hit that gets dealt to them, any 1 attack that gets dealt to them, will receive a 50% defense down on it. So it's going to hit a lot harder. That's the way to think about it. So you only want to wake them up if you're going to hit them hard. And therefore, again, that could be a really, really nice thing where maybe you wake them with an NP at that point. So this is where a good chunk of her extra damage can come from. And again, with her being a buster unit, we're super concerned with cooldowns. She is on a 6-turn cooldown on this first skill here. Now, with her second skill, she inflicts terror status 1 time 3 turns to all enemies, has a chance to activate the debuff below every turn, and then again, when activated, a 500% chance to stun them for 1 turn. So again, there is a chance to activate the stun proc basically of this. It's just like a lot of other terror type skills. It's only a 55% chance, but it can happen anytime over 3 turns. It's not guaranteed to happen, but you've got really good odds with it being 55%. Again, and then all it's going to do is it can only happen the 1 time. Once it happens, it won't happen again after that. But basically, when it does happen, it will stun them. So you're pretty much going to be using this as a way to, again, sort of mitigate the enemy's actions. It's a way of just locking them down. So each one of the enemies, so let's say you're facing 3 enemies, each one gets terror when you use this skill. Each one of them has a chance to be stunned separate from the others. So it's not just going to stun one of the enemies, it has the chance to stun each of the 3 enemies 1 time. So that's the way to think about it. And it can just sort of lock down their actions. It can reduce the amount of offensive output that they have so that you're not going to be taking as much damage yourself. So really, really nice in that regard. Then this further will also reduce all enemies' defense for 3 turns by 20%. When you consider the 50% from the first skill, you're starting to stack up to quite a bit of steroids here just on the enemy side. So not self-steroids, but instead debuffs for the enemy. And again, this one's on a 7-turn cooldown, so unless you're pulling some sort of shenanigans with like Atlas Mystic Code or something like that, you're probably not getting back to this one multiple times in a normal 3-turn. Now, third skill here, we're looking at this one, and it's her 50% charge skill. This one's really nice. They have added charge after the fact now to Abby, who had always charge per turn, and then got a 30% charge on top of that. But now, again, Summer Abby here just starts out by having 50% charge, so that's really, really solid. It's also going to increase her own debuff success rate by 30% for 3 turns, which will help landing the defense downs and such, so really, really nice. It's not going to help with the activation chance of the stun, but it will help the fact that the stun should land, but granted, it's already 500%, so there's really nothing that, you know, has a chance to resist that. Still, like I said, it's going to help you land all of these debuffs, which are integral to her damage, so it's a really, really nice thing in that regard. Now, again, on top of that, it's also going to reduce one enemy's Buster resistance for 3 turns by 30%. So again, Abby's very debuff oriented, and that's why it's really nice that you actually have the debuff success rate here to give her the increased odds of landing this stuff. Now, again here, this one's also on a 6-turn cooldown, and that's probably the most important one to have on it, because that means you're going to be able to double it up. So you're going to be able to get this on turns 1 and 3, just like with her first skill. So that way you can actually activate it twice, and so that she can charge 50% twice in a Koyanskaya setup. So really good there, because that means that she's going to be capable of starting from at least a 50% charge CE. Again, even without her append, but certainly if you did have her append maxed out, her mana loading append there, you would be able to do it with even a 30% C, which they're not too terribly common in the game, but that can be nice in the middle of, like, say, an event where you get a 50% CE at MLB, but maybe you don't have MLB of it yet. That's where some of the 50%ers tend to shine through. So again, this is a really, really nice thing for her to have. Now, as we get to her passive skills here, she has existence outside the domain EX for some critical stars per turn and debuff resistance. It's just going to make it harder for people to land debuffs on her specifically, so not a bad one there. And then Insanity B plus for increased Buster performance by 9%. She gets her own nice little unique variant there. And then Divinity B plus for some flat damage added to all of her attacks. So again, nothing too crazy there, but still really nice passive skills. Now again, talking about her appends here, the first one, the extra attack finesse, this is up to you. You can definitely go for this if you're going to be someone that's going to maybe put Abby more on an island and have her sort of, you know, do all the responsibilities for damage dealing, maybe doing solos and stuff. She should be reasonably capable of that with the sleep, with the terror, but it's up to you, because that's going to be a little bit weird for locking an enemy down with a unit that has an AoE NP. So yes, I'm not going to say you can't use her in solos, just you'll have to be careful with how you use her. If you're doing that, that's where the extra attack finesse will really shine through for her. Otherwise, it's just the standard sort of thing where, hey, it's a good thing if you have the spare coins. I highly recommend the mana loading, just because that's going to allow her to operate in sort of hybrid setups, as well as setups where maybe she can start from, like I talked about earlier, the 30% charge there. So really, really nice. Mana loading's probably what I go with first on her. And then her third skill here is Anti-Avenger Attack Damage Aptitude. This one's really not that useful. Abby doesn't really have that like niche to really apply against them. And again, she's basically a foreigner, so someone that would just be neutral against Avengers otherwise. Up to you. If you have the coins again, you can go for it. But to me, this is probably the weakest of the three. Now, again, just really quickly here, talking about skill order, I highly recommend actually leveling the third skill first, and then probably going with the first skill at that. Because this skill, a lot of it is just the activation chance of the stun. If you're going to be using her more in challenges, then I would maybe choose this. But for right now, to me, the skill leveling order probably goes 3, 1, 2. And that way you actually have a good shot of getting her damage dealing aspects up and online very quickly. And that's going to be a little bit important for a foreigner because remember, when you're dealing with foreigners, they're just like your, again, like pretenders and your Avengers, where they're going to be using all ascension materials from leveling up their skills. So really difficult if you don't actually have the ascension materials lying around. Now, talking about her Noble Phantasm, it's an AoE 3-hit Buster MP. It removes all enemies' defensive buffs. Now, you may be remembering earlier in the review here where, yeah, she had a buff removal ability on her first skill there. That's a really nice ability, but this one only does defensive. The other one is all buffs. So the difference there is that defensive stuff is again going to be, as you guys can see here pictured, things like dodge, things like invuln, things like solemn defense. And again, it does mean that they have to be removable. They can't be some sort of like static part of a challenge quest that's isolated in a white box outline. Those cannot be removed, but certainly anything else could be. So this is going to allow you to be able to make sure you deal damage to an enemy. The only thing that probably would be really nice for the enemy that wouldn't be included here would be guts. But because of her first skill, she could still remove a guts with that ability. So again, she wouldn't be able to remove it with the NP, but as long as you caught it before you fired off the NP, you would be solid. So again, it's a really, really nice thing to have. It is a little bit redundant, but it just means that you have the ability to lock it down a little bit more. And remember too, this is an like enemy-wide type ability. So the fact that it's an AoE buff cleanse, this puts her on par with units like Amakusa. In fact, I believe Abby getting added to the game was a big reason why you saw the Amakusa buff that happened later on during his event at Chaldea Boys that happened this year earlier on in A. I believe that's why they felt the need to go ahead and buff him more, is because now that Summer Abby existed and was also an AoE buff strip machine, they kind of needed to give him a little bit more firepower to make him really worth it. So again, they kind of looked at that and they said like, man, Abby has that not only on her NP, but she also has it just flat out on her skill. She is really good and arguably better at locking enemies down than even Amakusa is. And so that's, again, why I think they actually went back in there and did that. Now, her overcharge effect just reduces their defense for 3 turns. It's after damage, so nothing too crazy here. But again, if you're managing to land multiple MPs against the same enemy, maybe because it is a challenge scenario, hey, that's going to be good because it is 3-turn duration, so you might be able to stack it up a little bit more, get a little bit more firepower out of it. And considering all the other defense downs that you have, she's going to be really strong. The one area that I would suggest not using Abby in is any sort of fight where there is just a whole lot of cleansing that's going on. Because Abby is primarily debuff oriented, an enemy that can cleanse itself will naturally just kind of counter her in that regard. A lot of her damage comes from those debuffs, so having the ability to remove it, especially that sleep, that could be really problematic for you. So be careful of that. Don't take her in against an enemy that's just going to be spamming that stuff. That way you make sure that the enemy, at worst, it might just manage to resist, but otherwise you're going to be good at landing those debuffs and have plenty of opportunities to deal solid damage. Now, again, like I said, I think a lot of the criticism of Abby actually comes from the damage output. And I've talked about Abby before and said that kind of, for her damage numbers, she's a little bit of a weird one. She actually appears basically at the top of our foreigner list here if you sort by AoE. So that's kind of interesting in that regard. But again, I think the NP damage sheet here, while it's a useful tool for comparative sake, doesn't always tell you the like exact thing for how a unit is going to perform. Because remember, this is assuming all of a unit's skills are active. So this is Abby's damage with everything active in her kit. And if you'll remember, basically she has defense down on one enemy of 50%, and then again here a party-wide defense down of 20%, as well as a enemy wide one enemy buster resist down of 30%. So basically Abby ends up with like 80% in terms of modifiers against one enemy, and then only 20% against other enemies. So essentially she can stack 100% against one and then 20% against the others. And yeah, that's not exactly the way the math works, but the way to understand it is just one enemy gets hit really hard. So that's why she, even though she's an AoE, appears so hard hitting right here, is because this is against that one enemy. The other enemies are going to have significant fall off. So I've almost called her before as like a low single target damage with splash damage, because that's probably a better way to think about her in that regard. Her overall numbers are not going to be this number, but still she's really useful for the other intangibles in her kit. The buff stripping, the ability to lock enemies down with terror in mass, and then also again the ability to put someone to sleep. You just got to be careful that you don't wake the unit prematurely, that you don't basically end up in a scenario where you go like, oh crap, I actually wanted to lock them down to prevent something, and then oops, I accidentally hit them with like maybe my AoE MP and woken them. But there's another thing you want to consider here too. You don't have to stack everything on one enemy, because like you saw here, you have the 30% buster resist down and you have the 50% defense down. You could place these if you had enemies 1, 2, and 3. You could, for instance, place the 50% defense down on enemy number 1, the 30% buster down on enemy number 3, and then give basically everybody the 20% party-wide one. So essentially, you could make it so that Abby deals effectively 70% of her modifiers to one, 50% to another, and 20% to one. You can break it up. It's up to you to determine how you want to deal the damage. And so that actually makes her pretty adaptable in that regard. And it's one of the things I've noticed from using her on my JP account is that Abby actually can be a really solid unit for not only just, you know, mitigating the enemy's actions, but also just spreading the damage around in that regard. So again, I don't think she's a bad unit. She's probably going to be one of those units that you really need to ask yourself, do you need going forward? But I do think she has a spot in anyone's Chaldea that doesn't have a prolific buff remover as part of their roster, especially one that maybe is going to be a potentially like challenge-esque unit, or someone that maybe is going to have some, you know, sort of loop ability. I think a unit like Abby is going to be great for those people, and she's still going to be useful down the line, even for stuff like farming. So you don't have to worry too much about that. I think she's really solid. Again, like I talked about, you're probably going to be wanting to start her out with some good craft essences. I recommend something like Aerial Drive or even Cranking. Both of those will be coming out like later. Essentially, you'll have Aerial Drive coming back with the Halloween rerun, and then you'll have Cranking coming out with, again, the Bunyan collab event that's going to happen next year. If you're looking for one that you already might have, I highly recommend maybe taking a look at the Mamaraiko CE from Little Big Tengu this year. That one's not too bad either. It's a decent 50% CE. But there's always room for anything that has, like, say, 50% charge and either attack up or NP damage up. Any of those she'll work well with. And again, she's certainly someone that can work decently with Oberon as well as Koyanskaya. So up to you to determine, but let me know what you guys think of her below. If you would like to see her changed in some way, what would you change about Abby's kit? I'll be curious to read your comments, and I will see you guys for the next one.